Business.
It's disappointing to hear a Labor Party that seems to have learned absolutely nothing. Nothing from the election and nothing from its time in office. That they live in this life of fiction, where money grows on trees, where you throw it around, you promise everybody everything, you fudge and you fiddle with numbers in budgets, you have assumptions that live in make-believe land, you ignore the reality of the consequences of your actions and you simply boot the consequences down the street for someone else to be responsible to deal with. That's the Labor way. That's the Labor way, and we've seen more of it here today. Labor should be hanging their heads in shame to fit the nation up with 6 years of the most abominable governance this country has ever seen, to learn nothing from those areas of failed mismanagement and waste, to fit up our next generation of kids with intergenerational theft of spending on the Visa card that somehow someone else will need to service, and then come in here as if there's no work to be done. Well, there's little wonder that the once Treasurer of Australia, the member who just spoke, hasn't even got his time as Treasurer mislisted on his bio as the member of McMahon. Why is that? Because it was one of the most lamentable periods of treasurership you've ever seen. So don't fess up to it. Subscribe to the Wayne Swan, the former Treasurer, the member for Lily's argument, when confronted with the reality of the debt trajectory Labor put this nation on. When asked what is he going to do about the debt limit, his response was, that'll be someone else's problem. And didn't that say it all, Mr Deputy Speaker? That is the Labor way. It's always someone else's problem. Well, what the Australian public know, and the message they sent to the Labor Party at the last election, is these political problems, they just don't swap from one side of the chamber to the other. They are the nation's problems. They are the people's problems. They are the debt and deficit burden that our citizens need to carry. It is the impairment to our economy and people's livelihoods and living prospects. They are our problems. They are made the problems of all Australians, and the problem that they also have is Labor fails to address this harsh reality. We've seen the populist politicking, we've seen Labor's headline hunting, we've seen the scaremongering. What you haven't seen today, and what Labor continues to demonstrate, is any sense of accountability and responsibility for its actions, to deal with the consequences it's created, the leadership to steer this nation and its people out of the dark corners of debt and deficit Labor has taken us into, no plan for the hard work that's needed to restore the great promise that we should be talking about, and that's the promise of our nation. We have the promise of a great nation, of living standards that are envied around the world, that we want to carry forward and sustain for future generations. That's the great promise of Australia. And what did Labor want to do? They wanted to trash and junk that and not even address the consequences of their action. The debt and deficit, for which we have nothing to show for it. No improved productive capability, no better chance to succeed, no opportunities that have been enhanced, no infrastructure that is the building blocks and the sinews of enterprise and commerce. No, we don't have that. We've got fudge numbers that Labor left to the incoming government, claiming these absolutely ridiculous revenue projections that were never going to materialise, but instead spent every last dollar of that fiction of revenue and then went even harder. And do we see Labor addressing any of that? No, 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 but this budget does. This budget is our action plan to take responsibility not for what we created but for what we understand impairs our nation. The damage it does to our citizens, the intergenerational burden it puts onto our kids, the impairment it puts into our economy, the chance for us to be all that we can be. That's what drives us, and that means we have to deal with the debt and deficit legacy that Labor gave us. Now, we saw in this parliament today shadow minister after shadow minister reframing, contriving arguments about cuts, only to hear time and time again, no, there's more resources going into those areas. There's more effort going into the building blocks of our future potential. There are more opportunities that we are working to create for our citizens. We don't ask for our people anything other than a chance for them to be their very best. Except you come in here, the Labor Party comes in here, and they talk about a young person's future as if it's inextricably linked to a life on welfare. I mean, when did we give up on people? When do we give up on our potential? When do we stop trying to strive to enable people to be their very best? When do we stop recognising that economic opportunity and prosperity needs to be won? It needs to be earned. It's not a gift that we just pull off the shelf. When do we stop saying to young people and to all of our citizens, be the best you can be, have a go, we will support you by targeted expenditure, by transferring consumption into investment into our future prospects, by tackling the debt, by having an economic management plan that actually says we can do so much better as a nation if we all pull together and tackle the horrendous legacy that this former Labor government has left us. That gives us the chance to be our very best, that recognises in the middle of this century there'll be 3 people working for every one in retirement. And if that's not enough of a challenge compared to the 5 working for every one in retirement now, what's Labor want to do? They want to fit them up with the burden of debt and deficit. They've already started, Mr Deputy Speaker. Do you know $1 billion a month goes into servicing the debt that Labor created? $1 billion a month, and that's now. What could we do with that $1 billion? What new potential could we support? What enterprise investment could we make? What chance could we do as a government providing the framework for our citizens to be their very best? What could we deploy those resources to do? So many things. But instead, what do we get? We get this politicking. We get this fanciful creation of hardship and harm when they don't even want to look at what's in the budget. And so what we've said to the Australian public is the great promises of our land is something we all need to work for together. We've mapped out our economic strategy, the budget a key part of that. We are faithfully honouring our commitments to build a strong and prosperous economy, because through that strength we can be safe in the assurance that we can sustain the living standards that people look for. We can be secure in the knowledge that the safety net we provide to the vulnerable isn't vulnerable itself because of our inability to finance it. We said we'd stop the boats, and we've done that. We said we'd axe the carbon tax, and you know what's ironic? So did Labor. So did Labor. I mean, even in the tax rises and expenditure explosion under Labor, they're in opposition and they're still doing it. Because the carbon tax they promised we wouldn't have, that they said they would terminate, under Labor actually goes up again on the 1st of July, and it extends in its reach to on-road heavy transport. So here's a chance to do something. If they believe anything that they've said today about cost of living, help lift that financial burden. But they won't. Of course they won't. Because it's all about politics. Yep. It's always been about politics. It's never been anything else about Labor than politics. And you know what our nation is calling for? It's calling for leadership. It's saying to our parliaments and our governments, take a longer-term view. Realise the changes that's happening in our world and in our nation. Build the economic capacity so that we can fulfil that promise, the promise of a great country with a living standard that's envied around the world. You can't achieve that if you hock your future on debt and deficit, on false promises, on popularity stakes, on squibbing the tough call to repair the budget. That if we didn't repair, that would kill our promise of the kind of life we hope for ourselves and those that have already gone before us and for those that follow. So that's what this budget's about. That's what this economic action plan is about. And that's the challenge that this parliament faces and, frankly, our nation faces. Do we want more of the Labor style of politics? No. I've not met anybody that wants more of this headline hunting, this crass populism, this politicking that's all about trying to win the headlines tomorrow but lose our future. Nobody wants that. That's why the government was changed, where there were adults in charge that had real competency and a considered, measured plan to build that strong, that prosperous economy, recognising through that strength we can be our very best. We can say to the vulnerable, don't be uncertain about our capacity as a nation to meet your needs for the future. We could say to our young people, please invest in yourself so that you have brighter prospects, a livelihood you can aspire to, and we will invest with you, but invest yourself. We say to those in the workforce now, you know this can't keep going. And they do. And they're prepared to make a contribution. They're prepared to make a second effort. They are prepared to share in the rebuilding of our potential and the great promise of our country. We're up for that. We're on board for that. It's not easy. Labor's probably not realised that politics And governance can be hard sometimes because it's about principle. It's about consistency. It's about shaping a plan and helping our citizens be their very best as we are working to make our nation have the best prospects to be its very best. So I say to those opposite, ditch the Labor playbook, get on board. This is too important for you to muck around with.